My family secretly decided my inherited beach house belonged to my older brother just because he has kids and I don't. When he tried to illegally forge my signature to steal it behind my back, I didn't just stop him, I activated a hidden trust my grandfather left behind, turning the property into an untouchable fortress and dragging my brother into a brutal legal reckoning that destroyed his golden boy image forever. The last time I willingly attended a full family Easter brunch, I was 25 and freshly heartbroken after a long-term relationship had ended in a spectacular pileup of "it's not you, it's me" and mutual emotional burnout. This year, at 31, I had no such excuse to avoid it, and somehow, I let myself be guilted into showing up despite every instinct in my gut screaming at me to stay far, far away. I'm Leo, by the way. I live a relatively quiet, structured life in the Pacific Northwest, where I run a mid-sized structural engineering firm and spend my weekends fixing up an old, sprawling cedar beach house on the Oregon coast that my grandfather left exclusively to me. It's not glamorous, and it certainly isn't flashy, but it's peaceful. More importantly, it's mine. I've poured my blood, sweat, and savings into that property. The beach house is going to be incredibly important, by the way. You'll see. The brunch was being hosted at my parents' place just outside of Portland. It's your classic, overly manicured suburban estate, with pristine landscaping, massive bay windows, and the kind of cold, formal energy that only comes out when company is over. My mother, Susan, absolutely thrives on appearances. If she could design her perfect life from scratch, it would involve a glossy magazine home tour, 3 impeccably groomed golden retrievers, a hedge fund empire, and a small army of grandchildren dressed in matching pastel cardigans. My dad, Arthur, was always more reserved. He is sharp as a tack, highly observant, and never one to say much unless something absolutely needed to be said. And then, there was my brother, Julian. Julian, the golden boy, the family man, the father of 3 and arguably the biggest, most painful thorn in my side since the day he learned how to lie and smile at the exact same time. Julian is 34 and has somehow managed to build his entire personality and ego around the singular fact that he has successfully reproduced. He and his wife, Chloe, are that specific brand of insufferably wholesome. They are the matching Christmas pajamas, live, laugh, love wooden signs, and Instagram perfect organic breakfast couple whose weekends somehow look exactly the same every single Sunday. To their credit, their kids are genuinely sweet. I love my nieces and nephew, but Julian wears fatherhood like a heavy, jewel-encrusted crown, constantly reminding everyone, especially me, that he is the one doing the real work in the family. He conveniently ignores the fact that I have financially bailed him out twice during rough patches in his failed entrepreneurial journeys. I literally handed him a $15,000 loan for a startup that went under, which I never saw a single dime of again. I've also watched his kids more times than I can count while he and Chloe jetted off on luxury couples retreats or exclusive networking cruises. Julian has always firmly believed that because he has children, the world owes him a perpetual round of applause and a front row seat to everything. And apparently, this Easter, he decided his sense of entitlement included the deed to my beach house. I arrived a bit late to the brunch. The traffic on the highway had been absolutely brutal, and the heavy Oregon rain hadn't helped. I debated turning my truck around more than once, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. But when I finally stepped onto my parents' massive wraparound porch, I wiped my boots, pasted on my absolute best, most practiced family smile, and knocked twice. The door swung open almost immediately, and there was Julian, beaming like he was running for local mayor. "Leo. Look who finally decided to grace us with his presence." "Traffic," I said with a tight shrug, shaking the rain off my jacket. Sure, he said, stepping aside with a condescending chuckle. "Hey, at least you don't have to wrestle 3 toddlers into a minivan in the rain. That's a whole other kind of hell you wouldn't understand." I offered a forced, thin smile and moved past him without a word. Inside, the house smelled heavily of cinnamon rolls, baked ham, and egg casserole. My mother emerged from the pristine kitchen, a smudge of flour perfectly placed on her cheek, and gave me a quick, performative peck on the cheek. "There you are, honey. We thought we lost you to the ocean waves. You know I live barely 20 minutes from your apartment, right?" She laughed loudly, treating my delay like I'd said something charming instead of mildly sarcastic, then quickly ushered me into the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was already completely full. My dad sat at the head, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he scanned a tablet. Chloe was setting down a massive crystal pitcher of fresh orange juice, and the kids were fiddling with their expensive cloth napkins. I took the only empty seat left, which happened to be directly across from Julian. "Started without me?" I joked lightly, noting the half-empty mimosa glass already sitting in front of him. "We had to keep the kids on a strict schedule," Chloe said gently, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's nap rotation day, Leo. You know how it is." "Well, I guess you don't." I didn't bother asking what a nap rotation day was. The first 20 minutes of the meal went exactly as expected. There was light, Superficial conversation, endless updates on the kids' preschool projects, and my mom subtly, yet aggressively, probing for any signs of a new girlfriend in my life. I answered as vaguely as possible. I told them my engineering firm was keeping me swamped with new commercial contracts, which was only half a lie. As I ate, I noticed Julian kept darting his eyes toward me between bites of his quiche. His eyes were narrowed just slightly, calculating, like he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I really should have seen it coming, but I was too exhausted to read the room. It started with a grand toast. "Well," Julian announced, raising his mimosa glass dramatically after the main plates were finally cleared away. "Before we get to the dessert course, I just want to take a moment to say how incredibly grateful I am for family. And especially to Leo, my little brother, who's been such a help over the years. We don't say it enough, man, but you've always been there." I blinked, genuinely taken aback. I was completely unsure if this was sincere or some kind of elaborate sarcastic setup. "Thanks," I muttered cautiously. He grinned, his teeth showing. "Which brings me to something I wanted to talk about today with everyone here, something really exciting." My stomach dropped. "Oh. No. Not at the table. Not like this. I've been thinking a lot about the future," Julian continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed, authoritative cadence. "You know, planning for the kids, building a lasting legacy, establishing roots, that sort of thing." My mom immediately lit up like a Christmas tree, nodding along enthusiastically. "Of course, Julian. Yes, that is so important. And I was talking with Chloe late last night," Julian said, looking over at his wife with exaggerated, theatrical warmth. "And we had this amazing idea. It's kind of out there, but hear me out." The entire room went dead still. The clinking of silverware stopped. "We think it's time the Cannon Beach house goes to someone who's actually going to raise a family in it." There it was, no preamble, no sugarcoating, just a direct, audacious demand. I laughed. I actually let out a loud, genuine laugh, completely convinced he had to be setting up a punchline. "You mean you want to visit it more often this summer?" "No," Julian said, his smile remaining perfectly fixed, though his eyes went cold. "I mean, live in it. Take ownership of it. You're always so busy with your engineering firm, your travel, and your bachelor stuff. You don't even use the place half the time. Meanwhile, we've got 3 beautiful kids who would absolutely love to grow up near the water. It's the perfect environment for them." "You're serious?" I said flatly, the amusement instantly draining from my face. "Completely," Chloe chimed in smoothly, as if this insane proposal had been an ongoing family discussion that I just coincidentally happened to miss. "It would mean the absolute world to us, Leo. And honestly, it just makes the most sense for the family." My dad cleared his throat loudly, shifting in his chair, but Julian completely steamrolled ahead before anyone else could speak. "You don't even have kids, Leo," Julian added, the fake smile finally dropping from his face entirely, replaced by a look of sheer entitlement. "What are you even holding onto it for? Nostalgia? A weekend getaway? It's a waste of space." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. "I'm holding onto it because it was left to me. Grandpa gave it to me." "Exactly," Julian practically shouted, jabbing his index finger into the mahogany table for emphasis. "He gave it to you, but he wanted it to be for the time's family. He didn't want it to sit empty half the year while you play at being some brooding coastal bachelor." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through the baked ham. My mom fidgeted nervously with her expensive cloth napkin, her eyes darting between us. Chloe looked incredibly smug, sipping her juice. My dad kept his eyes glued to his water glass, but I noticed his knuckles turning white as his grip tightened. I took a slow, deep breath, then another, forcing my heart rate down. "I'm not giving you the house," I said, my voice dead even and unnervingly calm. Julian's smug expression vanished in an instant. "Why not?" "Because it's mine," I replied, locking eyes with him. "Because I've spent the last 6 years of my life and thousands of my own dollars keeping it from falling apart while you ignored it. Because I love Grandpa, and I respect his final wishes. And most importantly, because I don't owe you a damn thing, Julian." That's when his fist slammed into the table. It wasn't hard enough to shatter the plates, but it was loud enough to jolt the toddlers, making the youngest start to cry, and it completely froze the room. "You're being incredibly selfish," Julian snapped, his face flushing dark red. "You don't even understand what it's like to have real responsibilities. You're single. You have absolutely no one. You think fixing up some rundown shack makes you better than me?" "No," I said, standing up slowly from my chair, towering over him. "But refusing to hand over $1 million property just because you feel entitled to it doesn't make me the villain here." Chloe's voice was tight and venomous. "You don't have to be so cruel, Leo. We're just thinking of the children." I turned my gaze to her. "You want cruel, Chloe? Try making someone feel completely worthless and disposable just because they don't fit into your little mold of suburban perfection." That's when Julian stood up too, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. In one sweeping, aggressive motion, His arm caught his mimosa glass. It tipped over and shattered against the floor tiles with a loud, violent crack. The kids immediately started screaming. My mom gasped, clutching her chest. My dad stood up instantly, his chair falling backward. He barked, his voice echoing off the walls. "That is enough." Julian's mouth opened to argue, but before he could get a single syllable out, my dad pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at him. "You have always been the problem in this house, Julian." Dead silence fell over the room. Even the kids went quiet, sensing the massive shift in gravity. My brother blinked, completely thrown off guard. "What? You heard me," Dad said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous growl. "You have spent your entire adult life demanding things that were never yours to begin with. You think just because you reproduced, the universe has to hand you a trophy and a deed to a house. You're not a king. You're not a patriarch. You're not even acting like a decent son right now." Julian looked utterly stunned, as if he'd been physically struck. My mom opened her mouth to defend him, but my dad shot her a glare so intense she instantly snapped it shut. Chloe quickly pulled the kids toward her, whispering frantic reassurances I couldn't hear. I didn't wait around for the apologies or the excuses. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and unlocked it. "What are you doing?" Julian demanded, his voice shaking with leftover adrenaline and sudden fear. "Calling my lawyer," I said calmly, pressing the contact name. "For what?" I looked him square in the eye as the line began to ring. "To initiate the lockdown. It's time you all learned exactly what Grandpa left behind." And that's when I turned my back on them and walked out of the room, leaving my half-eaten brunch and my stunned family behind. Update 1. 30 minutes later, I was sitting alone in my truck in a deserted strip mall parking lot as a very familiar, highly confidential PDF document loaded onto my phone screen. It was a document Julian didn't know existed. Not yet, anyway. It had been exactly 33 minutes since I walked out of that dining room. I hadn't driven all the way home. I just sat there, the engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, staring out through the rain-streaked windshield as the massive weight of what had just happened finally sank into my bones. My phone rested on the passenger seat, the PDF glowing brightly. Page 2 of the trust document had my name printed on it in bold, heavy letters, right next to a specific legal clause that Julian had probably never even conceived of in his wildest dreams. One single paragraph. That was all it took to destroy his entire plan. But I wasn't ready to go nuclear just yet. Not until they made it absolutely necessary. I don't know why I had expected anything different from that brunch. Maybe some naive, lingering part of my inner child still hoped my family would finally treat me like a human being rather than a placeholder. I was the spare, the backup plan, the safety net. I wasn't the firstborn. I wasn't married. I wasn't a parent. In my mother's superficial eyes, those missing milestones completely disqualified me from being important. And in Julian's eyes, those things made me nothing more than a free storage locker he could raid whenever his picture-perfect, deeply in debt life started cracking at the seams. I waited 10 more minutes in that parking lot, processing the adrenaline, then put the truck in drive and headed toward the coast. I didn't go back to my Portland apartment. I drove straight to Cannon Beach. It was still freezing that early in the spring, the Oregon wind whipping violently off the ocean, but the drive along the winding coastal highway helped shake the edge off my blinding anger. As soon as I turned onto the familiar gravel path and saw the old, weathered cedar shingles and the massive wraparound porch of the beach house, my chest finally loosened. This place wasn't just a piece of real estate to me. It was my sanctuary. It was Saturday morning pancakes with Grandpa while the rain lashed against the windows. It was spending an entire summer helping him patch up the roof while he told me stories about how he and my grandmother had designed and built the foundation with their bare hands. He had left it to me for a very specific reason, and I had kept it standing not just structurally, but spiritually. Julian didn't know the first thing about taking care of something that couldn't be posted online with a number-blessed hashtag. I stayed at the beach house for the rest of the weekend. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't check my emails. I needed space to breathe. But when I finally returned to the city on Monday morning and turned my phone's cellular data back on, the real storm hit. 32 missed messages. 12 from Julian, 10 from my mother, and a scattered few from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in months. The subject line of one frantic email from my mom simply read, "You're being incredibly dramatic, Leo." Julian's first voicemail came through the moment my phone connected to the Wi-Fi. "Leo, what the hell was that? You made a massive scene in front of my kids. You embarrassed me in front of mom and dad. And for what? A stupid, drafty house? You don't even have anyone to share it with. Call me back right now. Fix this." The next voicemail was a bit shorter, his tone shifting from angry to patronizing. "Okay, look, if this is about what I said, maybe I went a little too far with the bachelor comment, but you seriously need to grow up and look at the big picture here." Then came the text from my mother. "Honey, we really need to talk. Julian told me everything about how he feels, and I think you're being very reactive and selfish. This family needs unity right now, not tantrums. A tantrum, right. Because refusing to be steamrolled out of $1 million inheritance was now being categorized by my mother as an immature tantrum. I didn't reply to any of them. Not yet. That night, around 8 p.m., I got an unexpected, aggressive knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole. It was Julian. He had that fake, diplomatic smile plastered on his face again, the exact one he always used when he desperately wanted something but didn't want to ask directly. "Leo," he said smoothly as I cracked the door open, keeping the chain engaged. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. "Why?" "Because we're brothers, and because I think we both said some things we didn't mean yesterday." I unlatched the chain and stepped aside, mostly because I didn't want him causing a scene in the hallway of my building. He walked in and immediately began scanning my apartment like a health inspector evaluating a dive bar. My walls weren't bare, but they were minimalist. My leather couch was a little worn, my dining table was an industrial metal piece I had welded myself. It didn't have the sterile, Pottery Barn chic vibe he was used to. "You know," he said, sitting down uninvited on my couch, "this whole thing could have gone a lot smoother if you hadn't stormed out like a total drama queen." I stayed standing, crossing my arms. "You demanded I hand over the deed to my house because I don't have kids. What exactly did you think would happen, Julian?" Julian exhaled loudly and leaned back, spreading his arms wide. "Look, I get it. You're sensitive. You always have been. And you've always been incredibly entitled." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely astounded by the projection. "Entitled? Me? I've earned every single thing I have." "Oh, really?" Julian sneered. "You mean the down payment Mom and Dad gave you for this apartment? Or the time I let you stay with us when you were between leases?" "Mom and Dad gave times you times the down payment for your house, Julian. I bought this place myself, and I stayed with you for 4 days, during which I paid for all your groceries and fixed your broken water heater. Speaking of money, what about the 15 grand I gave you for your failed app startup? The money you swore you'd pay back?" Julian rolled his eyes dismissively. "That was years ago. It's not about petty cash, Leo. It's about what makes sense for the legacy of this family. You live alone. You don't even use the Cannon Beach house to its full potential. My family needs that space. My kids need it. You don't need it. You just times one times it. There's a massive difference." "It's mine," I repeated, my voice cold. We sat in silence for a tense moment. Then, he stood up, walked toward the door, and said something I will absolutely never forget. "You're going to die alone in that house, Leo. Is that what you really want?" It wasn't a question, it was a vicious verdict. I opened the front door and pointed out into the hallway. "Get out." He left, but he made sure to drop one last toxic line over his shoulder. "You're going to regret this, I promise you." That entire week, the texts from my mother intensified. She begged me to be the bigger person, told me I should think about the children, and even had the audacity to remind me how much stress Julian had been under lately with his job. Every single message came with the exact same underlying, poisonous current. "Why can't you just give him what he wants so my life is easier?" It wasn't just about the house anymore, it never had been. It was about total control. It was about erasing my boundaries so they could feel comfortable. And then, the ultimate betrayal happened. On Thursday afternoon, I got a call from a good friend of mine, Marcus, who worked as a senior broker in coastal real estate. We had gone to college together, and he now handled a lot of high-end properties in the Cannon Beach area. He sounded incredibly uncomfortable when I answered. "Hey Leo, quick, weird question. Did you decide to list the beach house?" I frowned, setting down my engineering blueprints. "What? No, absolutely not." He hesitated, exhaling slowly into the receiver. "Because someone just tried to." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, tried to?" Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Someone contacted our regional office this morning claiming they had assigned power of attorney on your behalf. They said you were dealing with some severe mental health issues and they needed to begin the paperwork to transfer ownership of the deed to their name, and eventually list it as a short-term luxury rental. Like a massive Airbnb setup. But the documents, they didn't check out, Leo. The notary stamp looked completely fake, and your signature didn't match the ones we have on file from your previous consultations. Plus, your name wasn't on the sender's email." My mouth went completely dry. I felt a ringing in my ears. "Who was it, Marcus?" He said the name before I even finished asking. "It was your brother, Julian." I thanked Marcus profusely, told him to freeze any communication from that name, and hung up. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a jackhammer, but I wasn't just surprised, I was furious. I was so incredibly angry that I felt physically cold. Julian had crossed a massive, unforgivable line. This wasn't petty sibling rivalry anymore. He had actively committed fraud. He had attempted to steal my property through illegal means. That was enough. The gloves were off. I called my lawyer, Elena, that exact same night. I didn't call to bluff. I didn't call to posture. I called to destroy his legal standing permanently. I want absolutely everything documented, I told her, pacing my living room. I want to make it undeniably, legally clear that no one else has any claim to this house. I want Julian legally blocked from even approaching the property line, and I want to fully enforce the secondary trust. Elena didn't hesitate for a second. She is a shark in a tailored suit. We'll lock it down by tomorrow morning. Do you want to pursue criminal fraud charges immediately? I paused, looking out my window at the Portland skyline. Not yet. I want to build the cage first. The very next day, I got a text message from my dad. Just 5 words. Come by. We need to talk. He wasn't the type to send cryptic texts, and he almost never took sides in family disputes. So, I went. When I arrived at their house, my mother was thankfully out shopping. Dad was sitting in his study, a dark, quiet room with heavy wood paneling and a dusty globe that hadn't moved in a decade. He gestured for me to sit in the leather armchair across from his desk and didn't say anything for a long while. He just poured 2 glasses of aged scotch and handed me one. I saw what he tried to do. Dad finally said, his voice grave. My eyebrows shot up. How? He gave me a tight, sad smile. I have eyes, Leo. And I have friends in the county clerk's office. Julian isn't nearly as smart as he thinks he is. He took a slow sip of his scotch. I'm tired, Leo. I am so deeply tired of watching your brother manipulate this family. Your mother shields him because she thinks raising a traditional family is the ultimate virtue, the only thing that matters. But you've built something quietly. You've lived honorably. And for some reason, you keep getting punished for it by the people who should be protecting you. I didn't speak. I wasn't used to being praised by my father. Not like this. The validation hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know about the trust clause until your grandfather's lawyer called me yesterday to confirm some old details, he continued, looking me in the eye. It was a brilliant move. That caught me completely off guard. Wait, he called you? My dad nodded slowly. Apparently, your grandfather anticipated this exact scenario. Not necessarily Julian specifically, but the possibility of future disputes over the land value. That clause gives you full, impenetrable legal protection and blocks any third-party claim unless explicitly approved and signed by you in front of a judge. It's airtight. Why didn't Grandpa tell me about it before he died? I asked softly. Because he knew you wouldn't abuse it, Dad said. He knew you would only use it if you were backed into a corner. That was the moment the earth shifted under my feet. The betrayal from Julian had stung. The years of blatant favoritism from my mother had worn me down to the bone. But now, I knew someone in this family had truly believed in me. Grandpa saw this coming from miles away, and he chose to protect me, even from beyond the grave. But I wasn't the only one with cards left to play. Yes. Because what Julian didn't know, what literally nobody in the family knew except Elena and me, was that the beach house wasn't just protected under a standard family trust. It was under a second trust, too, a hidden one that had been quietly growing in value for over a decade, and it had a clause of its own, one that was about to make this whole situation infinitely more complicated for Julian, and a lot more public. Update 2. For the first time in weeks, I slept. Not well, and certainly not deeply, but without waking up drenched in adrenaline or fury. It was the kind of exhausted, heavy sleep you get after a long fever finally breaks. When I opened my eyes the next morning, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, letting the gray Oregon light filter in through the blinds. It was a new day, and I had just hit the absolute lowest point in my family's history. Julian had tried to literally steal my house, not just argue over it, not just guilt-trip me or manipulate my mother into pressuring me. He had actively, deliberately, and illegally tried to assume control of my property using forged documents, and then had the sheer audacity to parade around my apartment like I was the one causing problems. And Mom? She hadn't said a single word about the forgery, which I knew Dad had eventually told her about, not even after the attempted real estate transfer failed. Not when I stopped answering her calls. Not when I skipped her mandatory check-in brunch the following Saturday. Her silence felt infinitely colder than Julian's betrayal. At least Julian was open about his toxic ambition, even if he disguised it under self-righteous garbage about family legacy. My mom's silence meant consent. She wanted me to roll over. She expected me to give up, take the hit, and let Julian win. Like always. I didn't. But I also didn't lash out right away. I didn't retaliate blindly. Instead, I started building my fortress. Quietly, carefully, and piece by piece, like pouring a concrete foundation. It started with the secondary trust. A few days after my talk with Dad, I met with Elena and the son of my grandfather's old attorney, who had taken over the practice. We met at a quiet, upscale cafe downtown. As soon as I mentioned the secondary trust, the attorney smiled like I'd just passed a secret test. "You're the first person in the family to ever ask about it," he said, sliding a thick file across the table. "You mean Julian never sniffed around? No one even knows it exists, Leo. It was created under a completely different corporate LLC name. Your grandfather explicitly wanted it that way." I sat back, stunned as I opened the file. "Why? Because he believed in planning for both war and peace. I found out that day that the Cannon Beach house wasn't just a nostalgic piece of family history. It sat on a highly desirable, massive plot of coastal land. And over the past 10 years, thanks to zoning changes and coastal development, the value of the property had quietly tripled. My grandfather had anticipated this exact boom. So, he set up a second trust, one that included not just the land the house sat on, but a massive strip of pristine, undeveloped forested land directly behind it that had exclusive access rights grandfathered in. The second trust wasn't tied to my name publicly. It was protected, dormant, and waiting. And now that Julian had made his illegal move, I was legally in a position to activate it. The only thing it needed was a trigger event to prove the primary trust was under threat. Julian's forged power of attorney attempt was the perfect, undeniable trigger. I walked out of that cafe with more than just a legal advantage. I walked out with absolute clarity. But even with that massive win tucked away in my back pocket, the next few weeks were grueling. The social fallout came slowly. At first, it was just the distant unanswered texts from cousins, my silent removal from the extended family group chats, the sudden absence of invitations to Sunday dinners. Then came the aggressive smear campaign. It started with a phone call from my Aunt Martha. "Leo," she said, lowering her voice like she was about to confess to corporate espionage. "Did you really kick Julian's kids out of the beach house into the rain?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? Martha, what are you talking about? That's what your mother told everyone. She said you showed up in a rage, told the toddlers they were never allowed to come back, and called them parasites." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. "Martha, I have literally never said that in my entire life. I haven't even seen the kids since Easter brunch." She was quiet for a long moment, then she sighed, a heavy, disappointed sound. "I figured. I just wanted to hear it from you. Julian has been telling everyone you've lost your mind." That's when I realized the full, terrifying scope of what was happening. Julian and my mom weren't just rewriting the story to save face. They were actively painting me as emotionally unstable, cruel, and mentally unfit to manage the legacy of the house. They were laying the groundwork for a legal challenge based on my mental competency. That one stung deep. I won't lie. I spiraled a bit after that call. I canceled a few engineering meetings, and turned down a lucrative new commercial project. I couldn't focus on blueprints. Every time I opened my laptop, I saw Julian's smug face in my head, or my mom's disappointed, judgmental frown. I knew I was doing the right thing legally, but it felt awful. It felt like betrayal. But in that quiet, dark spiral, something shifted. One night, I drove out to the beach house again. It was late, almost midnight. The ocean was pitch black and roaring. The wind was sharp and freezing. I stood on the back porch, looking out at the water, and I remembered Grandpa showing me how to change out the old breaker box. He believed in doing things yourself. He believed in true ownership. Not the kind you brag about online, but the kind you build with your own two hands, one careful decision at a time. That's when I made my final decision. I went back to work with an absolute vengeance. I filed the paperwork with Alina to legally merge and lock down both trusts. I hired a renowned landscape architect to help plan a strict coastal wildlife preservation design for the undeveloped property, which legally made the entire plot completely ineligible for commercial rental zoning. I installed a state-of-the-art security system around the perimeter and rewired the alarm with a remote access app on my phone. I even contacted a local university's marine biology department, officially offering the forested land and beach access as a protected summer field site for their ecology students. And the absolute best part? None of this required Julian's or my mother's approval. He couldn't stop it. He didn't even know it was happening. I kept it dead quiet, laying the bricks of my fortress in complete silence. Then, Julian made his final, fatal mistake. It was a Friday afternoon. I was sitting at my office desk when I got a notification from the beach house security app. Front gate camera. Motion detected. I opened the live feed on my monitor. There he was. Julian, standing at the heavy iron front gate with his arms crossed, wearing a smug, victorious expression and holding a thick manila folder. Chloe was sitting in his SUV behind him. I watched as he pressed the intercom button. "Leo," he said directly into the camera lens, grinning, "I know you can hear me through this thing." I didn't answer. I just watched. He held up the folder. "This is a formal legal petition for shared ownership. I talked to a real lawyer. If you want to do this the hard way, we can go to court. But once the judge sees you've been acting emotionally unstable, hostile toward your own family, and hoarding the property, they'll consider that grounds for a forced equity split. You're done, Leo, open the gate." I stared at the screen in pure disbelief. He actually thought he could bluff his way into a legal claim using his fabricated smear campaign. He didn't know about the zoning changes. He didn't know about the second trust. He didn't know about the university ecology contract, or the airtight clause that gave me sole authority. "This isn't over," Julian threatened the camera when the gate didn't open. "You don't get to shut us out just because you're bitter and lonely. We're family. And if you don't open this gate, I swear to God, I will ruin you. I hit the record button, saved the high-definition footage to the cloud, and ended the feed. Then, I picked up the phone and called Elena. It's time, I told her. Let's begin. The Monday after Julian tried to bluff his way into a court battle, I walked into Elena's office with a completely different posture. I was done playing the victim. I was done playing nice. It was time to fight fire with a blowtorch. Elena slid a stamped folder across her desk. That's the preservation clause, finalized and signed by the county clerk. Zoning is officially locked. No short-term rentals, no subdivisions, no joint residential claims. That land is now legally protected as an environmental and educational property unless revoked by you. I nodded, feeling a massive weight lift. Perfect. Now, let's go one step further. I want to make a statement. Something public that completely destroys the narrative that I'm the unstable one. Elena smiled like a predator. I was hoping you'd say that. Step 1 was the dossier. We compiled every single interaction between me and Julian over the past year. The demanding texts, the unhinged voicemails, the security footage of his threats at the gate, and the absolute crown jewel, the signed, notarized statement from Marcus detailing Julian's fraudulent attempt to forge a power of attorney to steal the deed. Step 2 was the trap. I reached out to Aunt Martha and asked her to host a small, core family dinner. I told her I was finally ready to clear the air regarding the house. She eagerly agreed, hoping for peace. I sent a single, vague text to Julian, family dinner at Martha's on Saturday. I'll be there, let's settle this. He didn't reply, but the read receipt popped up instantly. Let him think he had won, let him sweat. The day of the dinner arrived. I drove to Martha's house feeling an unnatural sense of calm. When I walked into the dining room, they were all there. Mom, Dad, Julian, Chloe, and a few aunts and uncles, serving as the audience. Julian was seated at the head of the table, looking incredibly smug in a tailored button-down. Leo, he said smoothly. Glad you finally came to your senses. I ignored him, stood at the opposite end of the table, and pulled a thick stack of printed documents from my briefcase. I dropped them onto the center of the table with a heavy thud. I appreciate everyone coming, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. I wanted to clear the air, but I also wanted to clarify a few things legally. These are certified records of every illegal attempt Julian has made to steal my property. My mother gasped. Leo, what are you doing? I have a notarized statement from a real estate broker confirming Julian attempted to forge my signature and fake a power of attorney to transfer the deed to his name. I continued, sliding the paper toward my dad, who picked it up immediately. I also have security footage of Julian threatening me with a fabricated lawsuit based on the lies he and Mom have been spreading about my mental health. Chloe's face went completely pale. Julian clenched his jaw, the smugness evaporating, replaced by sheer panic. You're lying. That's fake. It's filed with the county clerk, I said coldly. And just for absolute clarity, the beach house is now part of an environmental preservation trust. It is legally zoned as protected land. It cannot be rented, sold, or split without my signature. Julian will never, ever set foot on that property again. Julian slammed his hands on the table, standing up. You came here to brag? To wave your little papers around? What's your end game, Leo? Burn every bridge in this family? Just to prove a point? I looked him dead in the eyes. My end game is to make sure you never try to bully, guilt, or steal from me again. You played the family man card like it was a shield to hide your greed. But being a parent doesn't give you a moral pass to commit fraud. My mother started crying, hiding her face in her hands. Leo, please, he's your brother. And I'm your son. I snapped back, looking directly at her. But for some reason, I've only ever been treated like a backup bank account for when Julian ruins his own life. That ends today. I dropped the final document on the table, the subpoena. I filed a civil complaint for attempted property fraud, I announced. We have a court-ordered mediation hearing in 2 weeks. If you don't show up, Julian, my lawyer will escalate it to criminal charges. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at Dad for help, but Dad just slowly shook his head in disgust. Without a word, Julian turned around and practically ran out the front door, Chloe trailing frantically behind him. The mediation hearing 2 weeks later was a bloodbath. Julian showed up in a cheap suit, sweating profusely. When Elena laid out the forged documents, the audio recordings, and the security footage in front of the court-appointed mediator, Julian didn't say a single word. He completely folded. The mediator concluded that the civil complaint would remain permanently on his record. Any future attempts by him to access the property, contact me regarding the deed, or harass me would result in an immediate restraining order and a full criminal fraud investigation. He had been legally neutered. As we walked out of the courthouse, Julian tried one last, desperate jab. You think this makes you better than me? You'll always be alone in that house. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I'd rather be alone with my integrity than surrounded by fake people who only love me when I'm giving them things. I walked away and never looked back. The fallout was massive. Word spread around town about the fraud attempt. Julian lost several major clients at his job because nobody wanted to work with a known forger. My mom went completely silent, finally realizing the golden child was a massive liability. A month later, she mailed me an old family photo album with a pathetic apology note attached. I threw the note in the trash and kept the album. This summer, the beach house came alive again. Not with toxic family barbecues, but with the sound of university students discovering tide pools, researching coastal erosion, and planting dune grass. I even funded a small workshop cabin behind the main house for the ecology program. I stood on my porch last night, watching the sunset bleed orange and purple across the Pacific Ocean, listening to the waves crash against the shore. They didn't take anything from me. They just revealed exactly who they were. And I am never going to shrink myself down to fit into their miserable lives ever again. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.